Oh boy, it's that time again. That's right, it's time to ruin my search algorithm by talking about Monster Hunter again and just fanboying over whatever the latest announcement is. But, sometimes you just gotta do something for yourself. But yeah, I mean, so at Summer Games Fest, they just announced the latest Monster Hunter Wilds expansion, Monster Hunter Ascendance. And I mean, god damn, I have to say that this looks really cool. Like, I will admit, right off the bat, I am a huge sucker for this kind of floating island aesthetic. Floating islands, castle in the sky, that kind of setting always just tickles me the right way. Like, I don't even know what it is. I just think it looks cool, and it's just kind of cool to see Monster Hunter go in that direction. Like, they did tease it a little bit in the base game of Wilds, because the ice area has like random floating rocks and like gravitational anomalies and stuff all strewn about, and that was just meant to be like, oh man, this ancient civilization was super advanced. But I guess it was also foreshadowing what the expansion would end up being, and man, I just can't wait to explore this new area. So yeah, I will say, when it comes to the base game of Wilds, I'll admit I have kind of gone a little back and forth in terms of my opinion of its overall quality as time has progressed. I always love the core Monster Hunter gameplay. As long as they don't fuck that up too bad, then I'm usually happy. So as long as my Charge Blade has a fun moveset, then I'm able to at least have fun with the game. And I do like the Charge Blade's moveset, as well as a lot of the other weapons. Although there were some questionable changes with certain things, like the Insect Glaive, especially in the demo beta section, which they thankfully changed. But there are also other mechanics of Wilds that I feel were like good on paper, but were not executed very well, at least at launch. Like, take the wounding mechanic, for example. I think that it's a really cool system, again, on paper, because the way it works is that the more you attack the same location on a monster, the more likely you are to open up a wound, which you can then pop using very special attacks or just raw damage to get, extra damage on it, cause knockdowns, trigger some very special weapon effects, and whatnot. And like, this is all really all well and good because it encourages the player to not just blindly attack the monster willy-nilly, because you want to focus on dealing damage to the same parts over and over again so you can maximize the amount of wounds that you're generating. So like, that's a good mechanic on paper, but in practice, especially at launch, it was like way too overpowered, because so often when you would pop a wound, you would cause a knockdown and the monster would just fall over and thus give you a wide window to just start wailing on it. But by giving you that big opportunity, you start dealing a ton of damage in one spot, which then causes you to open up more wounds, and God forbid if you have KO damage as well. So you can easily get into this loop where you're just stun locking monsters over and over again by popping wounds, then you bash them in the head until they get knocked out with KO damage, and then by the time they finally get back up again, they have tons of wounds on their body that you can then pop again to keep them knocked down. And it's like, at a certain point, it feels like we're the monsters bullying them, And so I feel like the balance of the game just wasn't quite there at the start, but it has gotten better. They have introduced more and more difficult monsters that are more resistant to being knocked down like that. So like, they still have wounds, you can still do wound damage and trigger stuff off of them, but it's not always a consistent knockdown on those higher tier threats, because I think they have been listening to feedback and seeing what people have been complaining about, and making some pretty good changes to the game. But it hasn't also applied to necessarily everything. Like, for example, one other system that I think is vastly underutilized is the pack mechanic. They have this whole system where you can have an alpha monster that is leading a pack of similar monsters, and you have to fight all of them simultaneously. But the two main problems with that is that, one, there's barely any monsters in the game that actually utilize them. Like, there are like, I think 3? Because there's Doshigama, there's Yonkutku, and there's the floaty people in the ice region that I can't remember the name of. And like, I think that's it? I don't think there are any other ones. If there are, well, the fact that I can't remember them, I think, says a lot. But even then, those monsters are relatively minor in the grand, like there's no like pack elder dragons, which I think would be cool, or anything like that that really utilizes the mechanic to its fullest. And even then, it's a mechanic that you can just kind of erase with a big dung bomb and just send all of the pack mates away, like basically instantly. So it's like it barely even feels like the player has to engage with that mechanic. And I would really like to see that utilized more effectively in the DLC, which, to actually move on to talking about that DLC, it does seem like they are actually leaning more into it, seeing as one of the first monsters they showed off was this sort of aerial flying monster that is clearly flying in formation with a bunch of its other pack mates and is doing these coordinated attacks on the player, which I think is a really cool idea, because like that was the kind of thing I remember seeing from like Great Azuchi and Monster Hunter Rise that I was surprised didn't get utilized more. Like, have these pack monsters actually like not just exist near each other to be obstacles, but actually coordinate their attacks with one another to become their own unique obstacle for the player, you know? Like, that is a really cool idea, and I really hope this DLC expands on that mechanic a lot, like it seems like they are hinting at. Plus, this monster, it is interesting. It kind of reminds me of Kuropeko, which makes me wonder if maybe they'll be bringing back some of those other older monsters, because like they are teasing at some other older threats that they're bringing back, so who knows? But of course, the other big thing that I need to talk about with the DLC is that they are teasing a new mechanic known as the Boost Bracer, apparently, which is like this rocket gauntlet modification to the Slinger that I guess gives you new moves and everything. Like, it does look really cool. But of course, it does bring back some memories of the Clutch Claw from Iceborne, as it is yet another Slinger modification that adds new moves to every weapon's moveset. And of course, that comparison is not exactly a kind one, because to call the Clutch Claw controversial is maybe being a little kind to it, because yeah, that the Clutch Claw was not a very popular mechanic. Again, it's one of those things where it sounds cool on paper, this idea of like this in-depth mounting system where you can mount monsters dynamically while you're hunting them and even bash them into walls and stuff. It sounds cool, but the main problem with the Clutch Claw, in my opinion, is that it wasn't integrated into each weapon's moveset very fluidly at all. Some of the weapons, it works fine, like Insect Glaive could use the Clutch Claw mid-air, and like that made sense because that's Insect Glaive's whole thing. The Lance had this amazing counter that lets you counter an attack and then latch onto the monster with the Clutch Claw. And like, if every weapon had moves like that actually integrated the Clutch Claw into the weapon's like moveset fluidly, then I think the weapon, or at least the mechanic, would be a lot more favored by the community. But the vast majority of weapons had to like go into this awkward stance where they couldn't attack and were just trying to like aim the Clutch Claw and land a hit in order to be able to do anything with it. And as a result, it was just this really slow, clunky thing to use, and it was really ugly. And of course, a lot of monsters were designed around having to be softened up by it, so being forced to use this mechanic that just isn't fun to use just naturally brewed resentment in the community. So it's understandable why people didn't like it. So again, I'm bringing it up because I think that this kind of shows that they are, again, responding to feedback and criticism from the last time they did something like this. Because now, the way that this seems to work, based off of the developer interview that came out, is that it's kind of like an install super in a way, where I'm guessing there's going to be some kind of meter or resource that you have to manage that will limit how much you can use it. But once you activate it, it seems to activate for a set amount of time, and then while it's active, it gives your weapon new moves that you can't use like otherwise. It kind of reminds me of one of the Nero's gauntlets in Devil May Cry 5, where it automatically revved up your sword to max and changed your moveset while it was active. Like, it is I think that this works a lot better because it is specifically a moveset modification for each of the weapons. So it's like you just toggle it on, and then once it's on, whatever weapon you're using, you get new moves that are based on how that weapon works, because they only showed a couple of them so far. But like, for example, the greatsword, it looks like you could just use your greatsword attacks much more quickly, which is a good thing. So that lets you actually like hit people with the greatsword without having to charge up for a minute and a half. The gun lance seems to get some kind of counter where after they block an attack, they can follow it up with a much faster strike. So again, like, it plays into each weapon's moveset rather than trying to impose a singular mechanic onto every single weapon that might not necessarily fit it like the Clutch Claw did. So I think that this is a much better iteration of that kind of idea of like a slinger-based augment than the Clutch Claw was. And of course, they did also mention in the interview that we will be getting other new weapon moves in addition to the Boost Bracer moves. So this isn't going to be the only new moves that the weapons are going to get, which I am very curious to see. I wouldn't mind. I'm always a fan of Gun Lance getting its Blast Dash mechanic, just because, one, it's great mobility, and Gun Lance is terrible at mobility, and two, it's fucking hilarious to see the Gun Lance rocket itself through the sky by shooting bullets behind it. So I always love to see it in every game it's in. Plus, I think the designer in the interview, what they mentioned that they were like the lead designer on Generations Ultimate or something like that, which I believe is where the Gun Lance's Blast Dash comes from. And hey, if while we're at it, if we can get Charge Blade's really cool lightsaber thing back while we're here, I mean, I wouldn't say no. But yeah, I guess the last thing worth talking about is that they did say in the developer interview that this was going to be a lot more Elder Dragon focused, which is kind of interesting. Because it honestly felt like the base game was almost explicitly trying to avoid putting in Elder Dragons. Because, like, normally the Master Rank, G Rank is usually when you encounter the most Elders, of course, because it's the hardest, toughest kind of dragon. But there's usually at least some in the lower, at least in high rank, but in Wilds, the only ones we got were Gormagala, which isn't even technically an Elder Dragon. I think it's now classified as a Demi-Elder. And then the first true Elder Dragon we actually got was only in the most recent update with Gogmazarios. And like, so that's weird for two reasons. One, it's weird that that's the only Elder Dragon that we got so far, but it's also weird because Gogma was like the final boss of Monster Hunter 4. So like, to put a monster of that caliber just in high rank, like, sure, it is kind of its own sort of, cinematic set piece fight. It's not like a normal Elder that just wanders around the map like Kushala Daora would or anything like that. But still, it's weird that they would go that hard for the first Elder Dragon in Wilds. And so I feel like that alone already implied that they were going to be doing some crazy stuff in the expansion, and that seems to be confirmed with them saying that the expansion is going to be focusing a lot more on Elders. So, especially with them revealing Kushala and everybody's right now, I expect we're going to be getting a lot of Elder Dragons in this expansion, which I'm very curious to see which ones they end up picking. I mean, with Kushala, I feel like that's a good chance we're going to be getting the trio of Kushala Daora, Teostra, and Chameleos, since those kind of all come as a package deal with their fun lore of how they counter each other. Plus, they just updated Chameleos for Rise, so it would make sense for them to just kind of port that forward. To kind of build out the roster. I also expect them to do a lot of the flying ones. Obviously, with Gore Magala, we're going to get Shigaru Magala and Chaotic Gore Magala. Like, that's 100%, no doubt, in my mind. It would be interesting if they brought back the goofy floating orb one. I don't remember the name of it. Okay, I literally just searched for floating orb dragon, and I think I found it. It's apparently called Yama Tsukami, and it's this old monster from Monster Hunter 2, and it's one of the goofier monster designs. It's literally like a moss-covered like sphere with tendrils coming off of it and a gigantic mouth. It's very goofy looking, But given that this whole thing is about, floating cities, floating islands, and whatnot, it would be really cool if they brought back like a classic monster like that. But of course, I also wouldn't mind seeing things like more modern monsters like Valstrax, which is always a fun, cool addition to the game. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what they introduce, given the whole Elder Dragon focus. But yeah, so overall, I do think I have high hopes for this expansion, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a massive fanboy for this series that tends to like every game, even when it is flawed on many levels. But for real though, like I said, they have been listening to feedback. They have, I think, fixed not all, but a lot of the problems with Wilds. It has become a significantly better game than it was at launch. They're introducing a totally awesome, cool-looking new locale that I'm very eager to explore, and I'm also wondering if they might introduce more locales like this. Because there's usually the main locale they introduce, and then, like, for example, in Iceborne, they also introduced the Guiding Lands as, like, another area, and then in Sunbreak, they had, like, that ruins, like, arena. So I'm curious if there's going to be another area like that that gets introduced, like, as a second new place. Also, one other thing I didn't think about was I'm curious what the weather of this area is going to be like, because, we're above the clouds, and presumably not subject to the same weather manipulation tech that all the other maps are. But one thing that I would like to see is if it had more than two kinds of weather and a transitionary period like all the other maps did. Like, it would be cool if there was like a more complex weather system that this map had to deal with that would make it a little bit more interesting. But yeah, between that, the more Elder Dragon focus, I do think the Boost Bracer is a much better mechanic than some of the other ones they've introduced. Like, maybe this is a little controversial. I wasn't a big fan of Wirebugs in Rise, though, to be fair, again, that was more from an implementation standpoint. As a mechanic, it was fine, but I do think that the balance of it was just a little bit weird, which I guess I am a little bit concerned about here, because it kind of all comes down to how exactly it interacts with each weapon individually. If it plays and enhances each weapon's strengths without, like, ruining their flow, and it has, like, decent drawbacks and limitations, then yeah, like, that's the ideal. So, like, hopefully they strike that balance of adding cool, interesting new moves while not going too overboard and kind of forgetting the identity of what makes each weapon fun to play. But yeah, overall, I think I am looking forward massively to this expansion, and as always, I'm happy to continue the conversation in the comments down below. By all means, I'm eager to hear your thoughts on the expansion, any kind of hopes or concerns you might have on the direction that this game might be going, or theories about what they might include in it. I'm happy to see what you say down below, and if you like the video, make sure to leave me a like and hit that subscribe button if you want to see more content like this in the future. But for now, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.